Campbell's trying to get into the right place for a striker to be in. Bowen to Wilson now. Little cut inside. Shoots! 4-3! It's Wilson who scores! A historical turnaround at the Caycom Stadium.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the 2010s. I'm your host, Alex, and with me for this one I have Dan. How are you, Dan?
Yeah, look, I'm all right. I'm going to test out the memory bank this afternoon with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we were sort of just talking before the episode. It's an interesting season, I suppose, to cast our minds back to. It was, I guess, in some ways, a noteworthy return to the championship under Leonard Slutsky for the first half of the season, and Adkins coming in halfway through the season. I think might have been. Well, I was going to say it was our first midway through the season sacking for a while, but of course we had Phelan being sacked the previous season for Silver. But we'll have to look back on it and see how we go, sort of thinking back on some of those memories. So, of course, sort of, I guess the first point off the top was the appointment of Nigel Adkins. So I think in the first half of this season, look back, we did sort of go all the way up to Slutsky's departure in just about the end of 2017. Adkins came in reasonably quickly from memory, and I think he took charge. We didn't have an interim between the two managers, and he won his first game then against Brentford. I don't know. Do you have any memories of that point in time? I think the general feeling I remember was sort of not really very surprised that Slutsky was going. I think Adkins must have been coming off his spell with, was it Sheffield United, where he'd done okay? I'm trying to remember now, but you know, he was just sort of one of those British managers that you just thought, oh yeah, he'll be pretty stable.
Yeah, I think my main recollections about his appointment were pretty much that. It was we went where we'd had, a couple of years before, but that, really stable period under Steve Bruce, and I think we're probably a little bit disappointed that we couldn't have kept a hold of tempted Silver to stick around and build with us. But those sort of dabbled in a couple of foreign managers, and then I think we went back to the trusted method of getting an English manager who knows the championship to steady the ship. And I mean, it felt like a reasonable appointment. At the time, and you look back on it, it was obviously, had a reasonably successful. It was only about 18 months or something with us, though, unfortunately. But we survived. So that was came in, and that was the remit, was to escape relegation, and he did that. So I think he came in and did the job.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just having a look because obviously he had the big success when he was at Southampton, took them up through from League One through the Championship into the Premier League, and was replaced by Pochettino. Then went to Reading for a little while and was at Sheffield United, where when they were in League One, where they finished sort of mid-table, and he was therefore sacked. So sort of reflecting on that, you think, a manager that has essentially failed at League One level being appointed in the Championship. Maybe at the time it was just sort of as things were done under the Allams. I mean, of course, we then went on to get Grant McCann, who had done slightly better, but also at a much lower level. So it was clearly maybe just Ehab thinking this is an approach that could work, or, a way to get cheap managers in perhaps. But as you say, I mean, he did reasonably well. And it's not often that a manager leaves their job having not been sacked. But really with Adkins, it was a case of, I guess he must have had a two-year deal or an 18-month deal, came in, kept us up this season, had a sort of flirting with the playoffs the following season, and then just didn't renew his contract at the end of that. So it was more a case of, I suppose, Adkins thinking, look, I think there's so much more I could do with this squad, but the club just doesn't really want to go there with me. So he just felt that was a time to move on.
Yeah, it was certainly very interesting. Couldn't even remember who was in the squad, and I just pulled up. I must have been real late. Must have been the last game of that season. But some interesting names popped up that I hadn't thought about for a while. John Terrell.
Yeah.
Seb Larson. I totally forgot that he ever played for us.
Yeah, I think I was saying
Fikayo
to
Tomori, who's off in
Tomori,
bloody Italy or whatever, doing
yeah, Ola
reasonably well for
Aina
himself.
playing with Forest in the Premier League. Yeah, no, I was saying to Logan on the first half of this, it's sort of a weird mishmash of players that you sort of almost associate with the current city, because I feel like we've now moved past that under Ajun. But you think of guys like, your Jackson Irvines and your Grzycki, obviously Bowen. But then, some of those guys that were there almost all the way up until the relegation from the championship. So Lehigh as well joined. We'll talk about him in a second. Joined in January of this season. You've got that sort of, almost modern city players, but then you've also got your Hernandez and your Myler, and I think Michael Dawson was still there that season for a little bit as well. So you've got that sort of blurring of the two eras in that sense. And yeah, as you say, some of those loanees, you've got Tomori and Aina, Harry Wilson, of course, another one that we'll talk about in a second, but some names there that have really gone on to bigger and better things.
Yeah, look, I think the biggest one that blew my mind was it's because I'm looking at it must be the last game of the season against Brentford, the 1-1, and Mazuch,
Yes.
he played all of about 20 minutes across 3 appearances or something in
Yeah.
his whole City career. Um, but
Yeah. I think because you think like there's Mazuch, there was also, I just feel like we had almost like one a season. We almost had this rule that we had to bring in some completely unknown foreign player to make 2 or 3 appearances and then release them the following season. Because we had Mazuch, we also had, and the name's gone out of my head now, that striker who is famous for his actions against Forest, and it's going to really kill me. I need to look it up now. Was he striker? I think he was a striker who like we were up 2-0 against Forest and then just completely shithoused his way to the end of the game with a bit of time wasting. It was not Balok or something, was it? Is that who I'm thinking of?
Norbert Balok. That
yeah, that's it. That's it. Is that? I think that must have been the following season, or maybe it was the season
I
after
think that
that.
might have been yeah, I think
Would
he's a little bit
that have
later.
been McCann?
Oh, actually.
Because I'm just thinking that feels too late, but maybe it was. I'm just having a quick look now. No, it was. Yeah, Norbert Balok, signed from Palermo. There you go. What a name to pull out. But Mazuch was like that. There seemed like there was just one every year that we just sort of signed from nowhere, and people just didn't really know who they were. But yeah, look, I mean, it was a strange time for City. But I thought, as you said, I think Adkins did as well a good a job as he could have done. You sort of look at the fact that I guess we did drop into the relegation zone. We lost to Preston in the start of February, where things did seem to still be sliding down the table, which was a bit crazy when you think we had been just relegated from the Premier League. And you look these days, clubs relegated from the Premier League almost at a minimum make the playoffs unless they've really stuffed up. But we did win 6 of our last 16 games to pull clear, which was really off the back of that Harry Wilson signing. But it is kind of crazy to think sometimes with those sorts of signings where you just pluck a youngster out of a top 4, top 6 club, and they can just hit the ground running. You compare it to like a Malcolm Ebioe 2 seasons ago where it goes the other way. But Wilson really did just hit the ground running.
Yeah, I think I think he surprised a lot of people how quickly he just seemed to gel and bed in with the rest of the squad, and just his ability to find goals and crucial goals as well for a young player at the time was fairly impressive. I don't know if I guess like it's almost, I guess the most recent comparison would probably be like Delap, who kind of came in and just hit the ground running as a young loanee from a Prem club, but or even I guess you could probably argue Carvalho as well, came in straight away and just like
I
goals.
guess
But I think
Carvalho probably,
he's he was a little bit older and had been
yeah.
abroad a little bit, but yeah, I think certainly there's the fact that we escaped relegation, a fair bit of that I think comes down to Wilson's influence over the last over that second half of that season when he came in, an outstanding short-term loan and a great deal. It's a shame we couldn't find some way to coax him back again, but
Yeah, no, I was just going to have a look to see because 7 goals in 11 starts is ridiculous for a player on his first. I think it was actually his first. No, so sorry, he had a loan prior to that. He'd gone to Crewe Alexandra a couple of years prior, but other than that, this was basically his first senior loan. And 7 goals in 13 appearances all up, but 11 starts was utterly ridiculous. And I'm sure no one really envisaged that sort of impact from him. We had the audio at the start of the episode of the crazy 4-3 win over Norwich that we'll talk about a bit later on. But I think that might have been his first goal for us, and that really stamped his mark on the squad. To have him on one wing, Bowen, I suppose, would have had to have been playing through the middle, perhaps with Grzycki on the left. I can't actually remember how he would have lined up back then. Maybe Grzycki was missing a few games, but a real impact signing in that sense. I've got the screen up now showing the incomings from that season. I thought we had Lehigh, and maybe I'm thinking of the next season, but we did get Lehigh was in the summer. Sorry, Wikipedia's misleading me. They do that thing sometimes where they include players from the next season, but because it's before 30 June. But no, in January we did just sign Angus McDonald from Barnsley and Wilson in on loan. Angus McDonald, I guess we were sort of talking the other day. He's one that, if we want to talk about those unknown random foreigners that we seem to sign each season, we also seem to sign a lot of players who, through no fault of their own, really had no luck with quite strange medical issues. And I think, was it deep vein thrombosis, or it was some sort of
something like that.
Some sort of issue that really knocked him around for a while, and he really struggled to bed in. But my memory of him as well was when he was playing for us, he was actually quite a dependable centre-back, and was actually reasonable. I mean, he only made the 18 appearances for us, which is a bit crazy, but it looks like he's still playing up in Scotland at Aberdeen now. But for all intents and purposes, like a pretty cheap but a dependable option. Dependable, I say. When he was on the pitch, he was dependable. Just couldn't get on the pitch often enough.
Yeah, I think he come in. He must have come in at a similar time to McLaughlin.
Yeah, I think McLaughlin might have been a season or two later. I feel like McLaughlin was under McCann.
Because I just
maybe McLaughlin sort of replaced him.
Possibly. I just think, he seemed like he had potential in the first, because he came in and he was sort of pushing for some game time, and I think he got a couple of got some football, and then this strange is just weird injuries. I mean, you're right, we do get a few of them. I always think back to the Snodgrass one where he came and stepped on a sprinkler head or whatever and bloody blew out his knee. Just like the weirdest stuff. But yes, poor old Angus McDonald, he certainly had a bit of a rough go. I think, as you say, hid there for about 2 or 3 years and spent most of it in the treatment room, unfortunately.
I'm just reading. I don't even remember this, but apparently in 2021, Barnsley had to pay us £1 million compensation because they'd failed to disclose his medical history. And apparently we said that we wouldn't have signed him if we'd known about it. And that's after he left the club. So he left the club in 2020. So I have that's verging on the Ajun era. Like August 2020 is maybe about 6 months before Ajun. But I'm like, I just have no memory of that at all. But there you go. It's a player that had a long-lasting impact on City, I suppose. I presume that £1 million must have been essentially the transfer fee we paid for him in the first place, or close to it. But there you go. I guess the other significant, departures or transfer news in that season or in that January, Ryan Mason did officially retire on the 13th of February that year. My memory is, there was a whole saga where he was trying to get back to fitness. He was talking about, whether he's going to play with a helmet and all that sort of thing. I sort of think of the Wolves striker. I'm not doing well with names today, am I? Jimenez, who had a similar sort of head injury, who did make a return to football. I suspect something similar was being looked at with Mason, whether he was going to play with a helmet. And ultimately, it was just deemed to be too risky for him, and he ultimately retired, which was a really sad one. And we're just talking about, these players with these sort of crazy medical issues. Mason was another one where, through no fault of his own, just had to retire.
Yeah, I think I guess like it's testament to him that essentially upon his retirement he went pretty much almost straight into Tottenham's like coaching ranks. I think with their youth team very quickly, and then I think he was still assistant when Ange took over there last year.
Yeah.
And I think it's a real shame that we did that he was forced to retire, that we did lose him in those circumstances, because obviously he's got a football head on him, and what an asset he could have been for us had he still been on the pitch. I mean, glad that it all worked out, and that he's healthy and happy, and he's still around for his family, because I've got a little bit of personal history with head injuries and that sort of tragedy, so can fully relate to the range of emotions that would have been being felt by his family. So I'm grateful that he's still around to be with them. But yeah, it's a shame from a fan's perspective that we didn't get to see more of him on the pitch, because I think he was, I mean, obviously we're jumping back a season as a player, but when he was on the field, was showing some really good stuff for us, and I think would have been a real asset. But shame.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like you said, it's great to see him stepping into management and having that life after football, but still being involved in the game, because he clearly loves football. So it shows just how fleeting a career can be, and that these players do really need to make the most out of it when they can. But like you said, I mean, ultimately good that he's happy and healthy, and can still have an involvement in football. Well, we'll talk about the games from that half of the season that really stand out now, and I think there's probably 3 games, and I look at that list of fixtures that really jump to mind as games that stick in the memory. There's we had the 5-0 win at home away against Burton Albion, where I think Grzycki didn't get a hat-trick. He did score 2 goals though. And everyone sort of just ran riot, even Will Keane getting in on the action right at the end. Actually, there's probably a 4th game, because we did win 4-0 over QPR as well to make it 9 goals in 2 games. But the 5-5 with Bristol City I've got up on the screen, and the 4-3 win over Norwich back in March as well, have to be the 2 games that stand out in my memory the most. I mean, that Norwich game I can still remember it, which is a testament to just, I guess, how crazy it was, because there's not many specific games this far back that I can recall vividly, but that Norwich game just being an absolute basketball match, where I think there was maybe 2 or 3. I'm just looking. There's actually 4 penalties in the game. Wilson scoring the winner at the 71st minute. It was just absolutely bonkers. Do you have much of a memory of that one, or the Bristol City game?
I'm looking. I feel like I'm probably the worst person to come on to them. I feel like I actually think that at the moment, like when I'm looking back, and I think this is maybe the half of the season that I didn't watch a lot of. There must have been something else going on, because I don't really remember watching Harry Wilson actually play that much. I remember the results and stuff, but there must have been something that was preventing me from watching games.
Look, especially
I'm just looking at this the timeline of this, the 5-5.
Yeah,
and it's just mental.
It's mental. Yeah, Wilson opening the scoring on 16 minutes, then Bristol City equalising 37 minutes in, then going ahead on 40 minutes, then going 3-1 up in the 53rd minute. You sort of think it's all over then. Then we get an own goal from Fielding to get it back to 3-2. Then I think they go ahead 4-2. Then we make it 4-3 with Hernandez in the 80th. Then it's 4-4 with Campbell. Wilson Wilson makes it 4-3, and then Hernandez makes it 4-4. They then go, and then we go ahead 5-4 through Campbell, and you think we've actually somehow won the game in the 87th, and then Brian equalises in the 94th minute, which I think for a game like this, it really did deserve to finish as a draw. But it was just absolutely mental. And to your point, I think second half of this season, not particularly in danger, not really going to achieve anything. You're forgiven for sort of going, can I really bring myself to get up at 2 a.m. for some of these fixtures? It was definitely one of those seasons. And I did actually, I wanted to touch on that as a more general point with you, maybe drawing the parallels to the season that we're currently potentially facing. And of course, it's 4 games in. There's every chance that we do still make a charge for the playoffs or promotion. We can't write anything off at this stage. Do you find it harder this season to accept the season of building and not really achieving anything and potentially a mid-table finish than you did in a season like this under the Allens? Because I actually think back on these seasons and think, well, I did get up for, I would say, 80 to 90% of these games, or stay up for 80 to 90% of these games. We did the podcast every week. We kind of got excited for all these games, knowing full well that we were very likely in for a season of, at best, finishing mid-table. And I'm just trying to think to myself, what was the, other than obviously just wanting to watch City play, the motivation to keep doing that despite not having that, hope for us, versus this season where you kind of go, I actually feel almost less motivated this season, which is a terrible thing to say, but you think, are we actually going to do much this season? You sort of think, we're going to churn another 15 players next season. What's sort of, how do you get motivated?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one. I guess it's that context around the situation, because you're talking about a season or a half a season under the Alum regime where there's not really a lot of heavy investment in the club. We've picked up a few cheap buys. We grab, 1 or 2 players in January, and it's sort of like, that we're doing enough to not go down a league essentially, but there's no real sense of like that they actually want to like achieve anything, specifically, because I mean we know it, they're looking for a buyer, and I guess, I don't know. I guess it's. I mean, what? As supporters, we always say, you support your club no matter what. It's through
Yeah.
thick and thin, and that's, and we do, for the most part. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what my excuse was, but, but I think, yeah, it goes to your point about then comparing with this season. I think the difference probably is, I guess, we've maybe taken for granted. Not taken for granted. It's not probably the right phrase. Maybe we've become too accustomed to
I'd say almost entitled.
how I guess open Azun is and the things that he says, and this level of expectation and desire that hasn't been in the club or around the club from from the ownership side of things for a while. And I think that partly sets up this sort of, it's almost hype around the season, and some people get really excited by that, by what's going on at City at the moment, and there is a lot of exciting things happening, but it kind of almost feels, I mean, in terms of why you're not so excited, and why sometimes I mirror your thoughts as well a little bit, is that it kind of feels like we're not actually progressing. It kind of feels like it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. We have a rebuild last year, and we recruit really well, and we push for the playoffs. And then, and I understand there's 5 loanees that are going home. There's 2 or 3 like high performing players who have been sold, and there is obviously rebuilding to do, but it kind of feels like we didn't go like, oh yeah, well, we'll keep the core of what we had last year and we'll just add to, because we then released like a huge amount of players again. We've had to sign 15 players this season so far just to like build that back up, and I can imagine there's going to be another 3 or 4 in January probably to prop that up again even further. And it's not, regardless of whether you make $40 million in sales, it's not sustainable to be signing 20 players every season. And it just doesn't. I don't think it really sets us up for this. This idea of being sustainable and growing and having that solid core. I'm just currently really frustrated by. I think all of the signings are. I guess I think as you mentioned, it's how late they have come, and it's meant that I don't know.
And look, we could be sitting here in a month's time and actually be really excited about the season. Like some of these players that we haven't even seen play could hit the ground running. Bringing it back to this season, I actually think one of the reasons this season was still such an exciting season, and even the following season under Adkins, is Jared Bowen, because I think having that essentially homegrown player that you can get excited about, where it's almost like I sort of equate it to in Aussie rules or something, where you go, even if your team's down the bottom of the ladder, but you've got these really good youngsters coming through, you go, okay, I can see the future. I can embrace what the club's doing in blooding these players.
It's the Australians as well. We had Jackson Irvine to get up and watch every week.
Yeah.
We don't have an Australian. That's the problem. Get Walter on the phone. Get him to sign an Aussie.
Yeah, I mean,
get Aaron Kunda on loan.
Well, look, I think I made that call a few weeks ago. That would have been a good one. But yeah, look, if we'd finished this season under Adkins, barely staying up, but then we'd sold Bowen in the summer for £6 million and Ahab had trousered it, and we'd gone into the following season with a bit of a turnover, but getting in lots of cheap free signings, I think the enthusiasm would have dropped really sharply then as well. But I think back to that second season under Adkins, I'm looking ahead a little bit here because we'll talk about that season in the next episode of this series. But going into that season, you kind of went, well, we've still got Grzycki, we've still got Bowen, we've got these exciting, flashy wingers. We did then get caught up in a bit of hype under Adkins where we did almost make the playoffs that season. So it wasn't as if it was just another season of sitting in the doldrums, which I think helped a lot as well. Whereas I think to compare it to this current season that we're facing with the June, I think having just sold Greaves and Philogene, there's not at the moment, and like I say, in a month's time, we could be completely different. At the moment, there doesn't seem that player to really get excited about, and really, like Hughes could be that player, but we just haven't seen him play yet. But we'd need that focal point of where we're going to say, well, look, if we're not going to make the playoffs, so be it. But hey, at least we've got so-and-so to get up and watch each, Kamara or Hughes or whoever it might be, someone that we can actually say, okay, well, look, I'm still going to enjoy watching them play, see how many goals they can score for the season sort of thing. So I don't know. I just found it a really interesting parallel of going, this was a pretty bleak time under the Allens, but I still remember, and maybe you're not the best example if you're saying you didn't watch too many of these games, but I still remember watching a lot of these games and thinking, why was I still motivated? There must have been some motivation, and I think it was probably Bowen and I guess Wilson in the second half of that season and some of these crazy games. But yeah, look, I mean, it was a wild time. We finished the season. I should actually say what position we finished in. We finished the season 18th, I think. So, pretty much the same as where we finished in the June's first season, I think, under Shotter. So, not quite on the edge of the relegation zone. Like, I think we're pretty safe with a few games to go, but not really threatening mid-table or anything else like that. I think looking at the progression, I think we basically got to 18th with about 7 or 8 games to go, and basically didn't change position from there. So it was a very sort of, season just sort of petered out like that, I guess, no real risk of relegation, no threat of promotion. So it was what it was. But we headed into the next season under Adkins, hoping for a bit more stability, which was a bit interesting. But we might leave things there. And we'll talk about the next season under Adkins in the next episode of this series. But thank you for joining me for this one, Dan.
Oh, that's all right. Pleasure.
Yeah, no problem. And thanks everyone for listening in as well. We'll be back this time next week. We'll review current City happenings with that loss to Leeds, as well as the closure of the transfer window, and talk about games to come as well. But we'll be back with another episode of this season, or this series, I should say, probably during the next international break, where we'll touch on that 2018-2019 season under Nigel Adkins. But until then, come on, City.